So, as you may or may not be aware, there's this thing called the demo scene. And first, before we go there, I'm Urs. I am part of a demo group called Mercury, whom you may or may not have heard of, where I mostly code. So I write graphics stuff. I've also tried making music, and I've tried making graphics, and I'm very bad at it, but I've tried it. And I've been doing this since about 2008, so I'm coming up on 20 years of that. In the beginning, everything I created was shit, and then it took about 10 years for it to be really great, and then I started winning the major competitions. Then such a thing called life happened, and now I have 2 kids, so I'm doing a lot less demos nowadays, but at least I have opinions about everything, and people tell me I'm good at motivating. So that's why I thought I'd tell you a little bit about why we're actually here. In real life, I'm actually in the other university, namely University of Helsinki, doing space physics, and last year I was actually one of the top consumers of Finnish supercomputing power. So if you've ever wondered who is wasting all your taxpayer money with the big machines in Kajani, that would be me, with simulating near-Earth space, plasma physics, and so on. If you're interested in that, come talk to me afterwards also. But actually what I'm here to talk to you about is this thing called the demo scene, and that's the reason why Graffathon is taking place in the first place, and why you're here. First, a show of hands. Who of you has never heard of the demo scene? A couple of people actually, so that's interesting. This fraction is increasing year after year because the public eye on the demo scene is decreasing. A couple of years ago, like when I moved to Finland 13 years ago, it was still such that the assembly demo scene competitions were broadcast live on public television, and that has decreased a lot. So I'm not so much going to tell you about what it is, because you're going to find that out during Graffathon, but I'm mostly going to talk to you about why. How this came to be, and why people, well, sit on their computers all night to create something that then other people that sit on their computers all night consume, and then never anybody ever looks at again, but still having fun doing that. The whole thing started in the 1980s when computers began appearing in people's homes and garages. So they started to look something like this. This is a Commodore 64, also colloquially known as the bread box. And the computers came with, at best, a tape drive where you put in normal audio cassettes and then needed to wait half an hour to load any sort of software. Or if you were fancy, you had a floppy drive, and then you waited only for 10 minutes to load any software. And they came with computer games that looked maybe something like this, and this is a top-end example of a great shooting game. And so there was no such thing as an internet yet. So if you wanted to have a computer game, you needed to either go buy a disc, and computer games then cost as much as they do now, so you didn't buy a lot of them. And then you bought 1 or 2 and found that they were actually not great. But then you knew that the neighbor kid also had a computer, and then you traded discs and you started copying and so on. And eventually, after playing about 200 very bad games, you found that one good one. And so there was this tradition of having some games, most of which were bad, but the computers typically included built-in programming languages. So if you boot up a Commodore 64, you switch it on, and within a second it shows you this. This is the only user interface of the Commodore 64. It starts and it tells you ready. And then if you were a kid in the 80s, with a computer in your garage and no internet, what else were you to do but to find out what that is? You typed help and it gave you an error message. You asked your friend who had figured out 2 of the commands, and you used those 2 commands to find out the other 5 commands, and then you started to just, spend your winter evenings trying to program this computer that your parents bought for you or something. And because you were a kid, mostly the people doing this in the 80s were kids, and you had nothing better to do, you just did something colorful on screen, and you tried to get the sound chip to produce some bleeps and bloops. And then you felt immensely satisfied with yourself and put that on a floppy disk and gave that to your neighbor kid, who was wholly unimpressed. What then happened, so programming languages plus boredom equals colorful random stuff that happens. That's the fundamental equation of the demo scene. You have nothing better to do, but you have a computer that you can program, and so you produce something that's fancy and colorful. So what then happened is that there were copy parties, because you didn't just want to trade your 5 computer games with the neighbor kid, but you actually wanted to trade with other people as well. And people started to set up floppy copy parties. This is a picture from a Danish copy party in the early 80s. There's a group called Triad, and it says, you can't properly read it properly, dealer quality software. So people went across the country. Normally these were organized in something like a school gym or something like that, and people came with their 1980s computers there and their floppy drives and just copied floppies back and forth, which was of course technically illegal, but nobody cares because it was the 80s. And so very few people bought games. Maybe one person in the country bought a game, and then everybody else got it copied. There is the statistics that Doom might have been the most copied game in the history of mankind. For each sold copy, there were 260 installations of that. And so what happens is that you had your computers and you went to copy parties and you got these games and you played them, and most of them were shit. But you went to other copy parties, and in between you found that there might be still some space on the disk. You know, you can fit on a Commodore 64 disk, you can fit a whooping 360 kilobytes. So if there are still 20 kilobytes free, why not put something on there? And that led to intros or cracked shows. So basically what you did is, if you were the one who bought the game, then you also used the free space on the disk to put something in front of the start of the game. So if you had some game, for example here this is now Magnetron, a horrible game by the way, never try it. A group called Fairlight, home of the real crackers, has put this intro in front, and if you actually run that on a C64, it just has the text bouncing up and down a little bit and some bleepy bloopy music playing there. And it's also not very fancy, but at least that's what you did. You filled the free disk space with something that you produced, and suddenly it was no longer just the neighbor kid who was interested in that, but actually the whole rest of the country, because everybody wanted to copy that one game that you actually bought from you. And then, of course, people, it started to become competitive because people were teenagers, and then you overrode the intros that others did and recracked it, and then they hated you, and in the scroller text you listed all the groups that you hated because they had recracked your games, and so on. George Bush for president, it says. Remember the name Fairlight because it will come up later on. Some of these demo groups from the 80s still exist and are still producing stuff nowadays. So a subculture was born, and at first it was just people copying disks for their shitty games, for their shitty computers. But then it became an intellectual challenge to be better than others, because if you were going to this copy party for the 20th time and you knew that most of the games you'll be copying were anyway shit, but you would encounter the same people over and over again, and you would challenge them. You would, for example, say, hey, I can do a rubbery cube that's bouncing on the screen, and mine is 64 pixels wide, and the other one says, well, mine is 72 pixels wide, and next week you meet them again, haha, I made mine 80 pixels wide, and so on, and these competitions starting appearing. Who can make the largest cube spin? This was ultimately settled in the 2017 with the rubber cube competition in Denmark, where somebody managed to get a rubber cube that's 4 times the size of the screen and an off-screen memory buffer, so nobody needs to ever do a rubber cube again, and nobody wants to see a rubber cube ever again either. But similarly, there were competitions like who can render a star field with the most stars, who can make a full color image rotate smoothly, these kind of things. Eventually, the people who did the demos and those who pirated games decoupled. That was around the time where the internet appeared and piracy moved online, and copy parties as such gradually moved into demo parties, because you weren't even going for the games anymore. You were mostly just going to look at what the other people had produced. Razer 1911 is another such group that you might have heard of if you've lived in the early 2000s, because they were back then the prime group for getting cracked games off the internet, and you would always get some sort of colorful stuff in front of them. This group also turned 30 this year. We might look their 30-year anniversary demo later if you want. There's another dimension that then decoupled, because one part was that these were, of course, mostly done by nerds who only cared about the technical limitations. So the question how big in pixels your cube could spin or how many stars you can have on the screen interested the nerd part of the audience, but mostly those demos looked very horrible, and I can actually go back here, and this spinning cube is an example of what's called coda colors. The colors are red, green, and blue, the saturated colors of the RGB color space, because nobody had even the slightest intention to ask a designer about what would look good. This was done by a nerd. But then there were the people who also cared about aesthetics, and they also started going to demo parties and found that doing colorful stuff with a computer can be a nice way to create aesthetically things. Now, Razer, the guy in the bottom right there, it says Rez. Rez is a guy from France who, well, he chooses all the colors always, but he does it such that it looks very good. And then people started to fight with each other whether demos should be about graphical or technical merit, or whether they should actually look good or have good direction or emotions or something like that in them. And that fight goes on today still. The demo scene nowadays has arrived in a point where demo parties are still being organized, Graffathon being one. This is oriented towards beginners, of course. You're not expected to know anything. You just do stuff for fun. But there are bigger parties as well. Here's a picture from the revision demo party that's happening at Easter in Germany every year. And there are about 1,000 people attending. And they have a huge screen and doing kind of similar things that you will be doing for this weekend, coding and then watching it together. And these demo parties are organized around the compo. The word was introduced earlier, it's the competition. In a small party like this one, it's mostly going to be a competition where everybody's productions are being shown, and then at the end you vote and somebody wins, and some love and hate is being created that way. In a big party like Revision, there's going to be the demo competition. There's going to be size-limited competition. Like, for example, traditionally, the 64 kilobyte competition. What's the coolest thing you can produce in a 64 kilobyte binary? Then there's the 4 kilobyte and the 1 kilobyte competition. And people have gone as far down as 16 bytes for something that produces audiovisual output. Then there are music competitions and graphic competitions and competitions for old school hardware. People are still producing graphics demos for the C64 and the Commodore Amiga nowadays, and so on. And sometimes there's something, just crazy competitions like you have a PC in front of you and you're supposed to throw screws into it until it crashes, and whoever gets to throw a screw last before the machine crashes wins. Something like this happens all the time. At Assembly, traditionally for the last 30 years, there's been hard disk throwing and floppy throwing competitions also. Yeah. And the typical rules are such that you can create whatever you wish. You just need to bring something on the screen and captivate the audience. The only requirement is it needs to run on an out-of-the-box system. On an old-school machine like the C64, that simply means you have a C64, you put your floppy in, and it needs to run. On a modern machine, that means it's typically a, for example, fresh Windows install. You should not need to rely on anything to be there. You just need to interface with the system and do something on the screen. It's more complicated on Linux because there's so many flavors, but typically the organizers say it needs to run on our machine, whatever that is. And then you just make do with what you have. Sometimes this means that if you know that an out-of-the-box Windows install has media files in certain locations, for example, some sample music files, you can actually open them and slice the drum beats out of them or the instruments and use that to produce your own music. People have done that in the past. Or you can actually take the system libraries. If there's something for ray tracing, you just call the ray tracing routines from there. There are very little further rules other than you need to be able to install that on some machine and then it runs. You also run into what's called last week's JavaScript problem, because if you make a demo for a browser that typically works, and if you use any compression tricks, they work for about a week or two, and then the browsers change their behavior again, and it doesn't run ever anymore. But that's fine, because your demo only needs to run once on the competition machine during the competition, and then you can be just fine with it crashing. Yeah, so there's the competition between technical show versus art, and we can get into that for a second. This is the same party from a different perspective. I think I'm sitting there somewhere in the front. Not sure where I am. So the point nowadays in demo scene competitions is mostly to produce something that looks like a music video. There are sometimes runtime limitations. It shouldn't be half an hour long. So revision has a limit of 8 minutes. I think assembly has a limit of 5 minutes or so. I'm not sure, but for Graffathon, you shouldn't worry that much. Just don't make it too long that people get bored. But it's like some people just make cool stuff where they fly by landscapes. Some people produce real-time ray tracing of stuff that deforms. Some people actually do demos with stories and content and characters, although if you try it, you'll find that it's very difficult to produce something that looks human. But it's also fun to produce something that's very bad at looking human. I can show you some examples of that in a second. A general rule of thumb is if you can't make it look good, you could at least make it funny, and then you'll win the competition that way. Sometimes works. And so the question is, why might you want to try this? Why are you here? I mean, you obviously are here, so you have a reason for this, but why would you spend your free time making weird stuff with a computer? The simplest and maybe most boring explanation is because it's an art form. You can draw pictures, you can build stuff out of mud in the forest if you want, but you can also sit down and program your computer to do what you want and do colorful stuff, and it looks nice. Then it's also an intellectual challenge, and this is increasingly what motivates me, because the computers that we have nowadays are so locked in. They want you to be the user, not the programmer. They don't want you to interface with it. I had to just wrestle with my employer's IT department for a couple of weeks to actually be able to root my Android device. So I want to be able to tell my computer what it should do. I want to low-level interface with it and tell, please render this and don't do anything else. And I want it in 64 kilobytes, and I don't want to interface with some weird libraries in the same way. Because if you can create an artificial world in 64 kilobytes that does what you want, then you have created something that's even better than Minecraft. In Minecraft, you can only produce blocks, and the game tells you what these blocks do. But if you can program a world yourself, then you decide what that world is. So that's what motivates me in part. Yeah, no constraints. Other than what you can do and your free time. Wasting all your free time, yes. Then one thing that I found is that it really impresses industry people. If you want to go into the game industry, if you want to do any sort of rendering and so on, then if you use the word demo scene on your application, that typically means that they skip any other review and invite you directly to let them show you what you've done. I've had examples of that out of the blue at demo parties, somebody from Microsoft came to me and asked me, hey, do you want to be our lead physics programmer for Quantum Break? And I was like, no, I have my own space program. And I remember some years ago, 2019, I was at a physics conference in San Francisco, and somebody from Pixar had heard that I'm in town and invited me to a studio tour of Pixar. Because apparently they were watching demos that are part of which I've done, and they were really impressed, and they gave me a private studio tour. The thing about Pixar is that they don't do studio tours. You can tell by the fact that if you walk into Pixar studios, on the right of you, there's this glass between where they store all their Golden Globes and their Oscars. And it's not locked. You can take the Oscars out. That's how not studio tours they're doing. And they were so impressed by the demos we were doing that they gave me a private studio tour. And I had to sign an NDA, and I was not allowed for 2 years to talk about Onward and Soul, I think, that they were producing at that time. So if you want to work in any of these fields, it is nice to have done demo scene work, because then you can impress them very much. But that's not what drives me. I've actually refused any job offers I've gotten from that in the past, in part because I do theoretical physics, but it might be different for you. And then there's the idea that if you are already working in software development and you are maybe working for a company and you have these annoying things like deadlines, customers, products, documentation, or AI nowadays, the demo scene allows you to write bloat-free code. This code never needs to be documented. Nobody needs to understand it, including you. It only needs to work once, and you can just write very wonderful code that does something extremely dirty. The lead organizer of one of the German demo coders calls it wellness coding. For once, you can sit down at your computer and just write something you like. You can code something colorful that's fancy, and it has no other purpose, and it's actually nice. I like that, and I do that too little nowadays. So I hope this motivated you a little bit. So give your best shot. Watch some demos, some existing demos. There's poet.net. Poet is the French word for the sound that a trumpet does, like this bike horn. There's demozoo.org as well. Both of these are databases for existing demo scene productions ranging back all the way to the 80s. You can visit a demo party near you. You are doing this now. There's also assembly, always at the end of the summer break. That's a huge one, but it's mostly gaming nowadays. I'm not sure if there's an art party this year. There was last year. Let's see if they haven't announced anything. There's also a Jumalauta party in Hammerlina in September. And then there are some others. You can go at demoparty.net and you'll see them all. And then be awesome, create something fancy. And now I want to show you a couple of demos, just because this has been kind of abstract, just for you to have an idea what this is about. I'm going to show you some awesome ones, but I'm also deliberately going to show you some pretty bad ones, just so that you have an idea. Because in the past I've been watching first the good demos and I was really stunned by that, and then I watched a assembly demo competition from beginning to end and noticed that about 3/4 of those were really shit, and I was like, I can do better than that, and that motivated me. So it's important to watch shitty demos and just do better than them. Yeah, let's start with that. So let's see if the audio now actually works. Where are we? Maybe we start with, let's start with debris. Not that one. No, typing is difficult if you have a microphone in your hand. Farbrausch, that. So this is a demo called Debris by a German demo group called Farbrausch. And you need to keep in mind that this is now a Windows demo running from a single Excel file, no other files around, that's only 118 kilobytes in size. These 118 kilobytes create everything, create the textures, the 3D graphics, the sound, everything. So this was debris by Fabros. I'm really sorry, I'm showing them as videos to you. I'm not showing the actual demo on this device because this is a Windows demo and this is a Linux laptop. You saw some common themes of the demo scene there. You saw greetings, so names of other demo groups being mentioned in the demo as the stuff that explodes in this case. You also saw that this was not actually having all that complicated geometry. By choosing to make a city mostly out of cubes that fall apart into smaller cubes, and the sky being a sphere that falls apart into cubes, and everything falls apart into cubes, you get away with something that's really nicely compressible. And so that's an example of something that just takes something simple and makes it look cool. Maybe on the same vein, I can show a demo that I produced here for a Finnish demo party called Payback that no longer exists, back I think in 2014 or 15 or so. So this is now going to be Luma by Mercury. This one has only points, nothing else but points. So this, at that point, we had just built the world's best particle renderer, and everybody, when they do particle rendering, always does random clouds morphing. And we thought, what's better than random clouds morphing? What is something where you only see the lights? And I drove in the night past the fairground, and I thought, we do that. And we spent about 2 weeks thinking about what are the mathematical equations for the lights moving on a swinging pendulum where something is rotating, and ended up with a horrible mess of template code that, we have the swinging thing that connects to the turning thing that connects to the jumping thing and so on. And in the end, it's code I never want to touch again, but it's only rendering points and a horrible lot of post-processing after that. One thing that you can immediately learn from that demo, as you might have noticed, is always ask your music what time it is. Always ask the music what beat it is. Always try to express your time and your blinkiness and everything that jumps as a function of the beat, because if you always jump on the beat, it's always going to be synchronized and it's going to be looking much better than if it's not. So that's that. Now I showed you 2 great demos, by Farbrausch and one by me. Let's show you a very bad one, because I require you to do better than that one. There's a demo called Vatti by ISO. ISO is a Finnish group that automatically everybody who lives in Finland is a member of. So welcome you all members of ISO. They have released the most demos of any group ever. I think there's over 1,200 productions in the databases by them, and they're all shit. Vatti, however, is the worst. For those of you who don't speak Finnish, Vatti means bowl, like the stuff you put water in, for example, and that's all you need to know. So look at that and try to do better. So that's Vatti. And even though it's ostensibly the worst demo ever produced, it still does something great because it has perfect comedic timing. The horrible repetitions repeat again at exactly the right point. It seems to go on forever. This demo is only 53 seconds long, but you feel like you wasted a lifetime watching it. So there is also Vatti Part 2 and Vatti Part 3. Vatti Part 2 is a noise demo that destroys your sound system, and Vatti Part 3 is well, it's very bad in a different way. If you want, create Vatti 4.5 or something like that, but try to be better than Vatti. This one was disqualified at a demo party in 1993, just so you know. But now I've showed you demos, the first one was a demo that was not really in the size limited category, and 188 kilobytes or 118 is maybe big, maybe not. The one by Mercury that I showed you was 64 kilobytes. I only do 64 kilobytes because I'm scared of actually putting assets and textures and effort in, if that makes sense to you. But let's show you something that's really tiny, because there's the 4 kilobyte competition, which means you create an executable file that's 4 kilobytes in size and you're not allowed to submit anything else. And 4 kilobytes is just enough to open a graphical window and run some shaders in the graphics card and produce some software generated music, but you can't store anything. You can't even store proper text in there. Maybe some words, but that's about it. You can't store pictures, you can't store music, but you can generate all kinds of stuff by algorithms. So let's look at Zensubo by Prism Beings. Prism Beings actually being also a Helsinki group, but I think nobody of them is here today. But anyway, that's 4 kilobytes for you now. If the audio works, it doesn't. Just a second, let's try it again. I used the wrong command, yes. There we go. So again, something really simple but really elegant. That was 4 kilobytes, and it just had 8 cubes and some wibbly wobbly stuff around it. But it had wonderful colors, and the soundtrack, even though simple, was nice, and thus that won the 4 kilobyte competition at this revision demo party some years back. I don't remember the year exactly. Now, I could still show you some old school demo, or I could show you something extremely fancy to demotivate you, or I could show you something silly. What do you want to see? Silly. Silly, good. Okay, what's the best silly demo I have? I could show you the first time I attended Graffathon, and that must have been 10 years ago or so. I also participated in the advanced combo, and I did not win, but I just took this same code as the Luma demo that you just saw, and I just created within a couple of hours an entry using a soundtrack that has copyright issues because it's by some Norwegian Norwegian TV show about how Finnish people are. And I made, I think, 3rd place in the competition back then. And it's called Kiitos Ämpäri, so I'll do that now. It means thank you bucket. Yeah, okay. Yeah, let's still watch something from an old school platform, because there are people that still produce demos for example, the Commodore Amiga. There's one I like to show you because it's produced by the Black Lotus. The Black Lotus famously being the same people that are actually the CEOs and owners of DICE, you know, the game company that produces the Battlefield series of games. They have been doing games since the Amiga days, and now they have this big game company, and they've also cracked games and published games, but they also have a anti-piracy division in their company, but as far as I know, they crack and release their games themselves. And so when they are not at work and in their free time, they still write demos for the Commodore Amiga. And this is now for the Amiga 500, so that's the original machine from 1985. This is a machine that's not fast enough to real-time play an MP3 file. That's a machine that's not fast enough to connect to any sort of internet nowadays. It runs at 4 megahertz and has 512 kilobytes of RAM. So they produced this on that machine. Eon, no, not Age of Disgrace, Eon by... I can't type with one hand. Eon by Black Lotus. Right, so this is for a computer that does not have 3D graphics. It cannot do 3D graphics. It's built for like jump and runs in 1980 style computer games. And the insane technical achievement here is that this game actually streams from the floppy disk 2D polygons that look like 3D objects in real time while rendering them. It's insane, and I don't think anybody will exceed this, but here's a challenge for you. I don't know, do you want to still see one more, or do you want to get hacking? What's the next thing on the schedule? I think it's an introduction into what you can do and some tools and so on.
Tools and tips.
Do you want tools and tips, or do you want to see one more demo?
Yeah, tools and tips.
Tools and tips? All right. Then thanks for attending. I think you are sufficiently motivated now. Do better than Vati. Do the best you can. And looking forward to seeing your releases at the end of the weekend. Thanks.